You're listening to Season 3 of Mobile Suit Breakdown, a podcast covering the entirety of sci-fi mega franchise Mobile Suit Gundam. For new fans, old fans, and not yet fans, where we watch, analyze, and review all 41 years of the iconic anime, in the order it was made. We research its influences, examine its themes, and discuss how each piece of the Gundam canon fits within the changing context in Japan and the world, from 1979 to today. Welcome back to Mobile Suit Breakdown. This is episode 2.53, and yes, you heard that right. We are going back to Season 2 for a special addendum episode as we revisit Zeta Gundam to talk about Camille Bidan with Doctor of Educational Psychology, Bailey Garbut. Besides studying real minds and chatting with us about fictional ones, Dr. Bailey is also a long-time Gundam fan from the Wing on Toonami generation. He is a Gunpla builder and leader of Gunpla workshops, and one of the hosts of Gunpla, Gundam, and Gunpla lifestyle podcast, The Cutting Mat. Be sure to check the show notes for links. Dr. Bailey reached out to us when we started covering Zeta Gundam, his favorite Gundam series. But we weren't able to schedule a time for an interview until our between seasons hiatus back in July. We chatted about Camille, how his relationships with his parents affected all his other relationships throughout the show, and we even had time for a brief detour to discuss some other characters too. So without further ado, Dr. Bailey.
I am Bailey Garbut. I suppose I'll talk about training. I'm an educational psychologist by trade. I just got my PhD in educational psychology. I have a master's in psychology as well.
Congratulations on the PhD, by the way. The last time we talked to you, you did not have that.
Yeah, and I was in another headspace at that time. But yeah, I did my research on language variation and language attitudes, particularly pre-service teachers' attitudes towards language variations amongst students speaking a dialect other than quote-unquote standard English. And right now, I'm working as an educational consultant at Duke University. But my interest in Gundam is, there's a cohort, and I think you're in it as well, of individuals that got exposed to it from Toonami, way back in the day. I'm one of those, what is that, 20 years ago?
Let's not talk about that. Let's not remind ourselves how old we are.
Indeed. It boggles the mind, especially meeting new fans of the other series and sequels that you haven't touched yet and that I shall not talk about.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I started way back then, and I started, probably Robotech really got me into stuff, but Gundam Wings was really what got me in, and I dug pretty deep in both the anime and the Gunpla to this point. I mean, doing it right now, doing a podcast kind of on that. Mm-hmm. But I also really, really was a fan of the kind of narrative that was displayed in the show and the kind of portrayal of heroes and what it means to be, an antagonist, a protagonist, and it really turns it on its head. And in particular, our topic today, talking about Zeta Gundam, they really, like, from the second series, they throw that on its head, like, immediately and force you to reconsider, your idea of it. But what I did appreciate you guys did in the first season is that First Gundam did that as well. It was definitely not black and white in terms of who was good and bad. So I kind of chuckle to myself, when people are so gung-ho for Earth Federation and so against Zeon as like, space Nazis. Like, are you sure about that?
The secret of Gundam is you shouldn't be for anybody.
Yeah.
They'll only break your heart.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, I remained a fan for, just a general anime fan going through grad school and whatnot. But I picked it up again recently. We have a local Gunpla building community here in Cary, North Carolina, and back up about 4 years ago now, and got pretty serious into enjoying the series again, but also building the Gunpla to an extent that I did before, which is, airbrush setup and painting and customizing, all that kind of stuff.
The real deal.
Yeah, the real deal, so to speak. Met some great friends that, like I said, we started a podcast together. So,
do you want to take a moment to shout out that podcast?
Yeah, let me plug it. So I'm on the Cutting Mat podcast with some good friends of mine. Joel True Gunpla is what he goes by. Brandon Mecha Genre, and Tino Big V Roman. So shout out to my podmates. And so we talk about Gunpla, but we also expand to talk about the scale modeling as a hobby in general. And then we also talk kind of generally about life affiliated to being in this hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And also, let me note that there's a E on our when you look at it on iTunes, we've got that E next to it because, yeah, we are. It's kind of no holds barred conversation that we have, but it's good fun, and I really enjoy it.
So you would say it's unlike Mobile Suit Breakdown. It is not appropriate for children.
Yes. And you guys have done a great job at that. I could listen to it potentially with my son around, but I can't do that for my own. And I also can't have my coworkers per se, dig into, the things we talk about. But aside from that, we find that the community and like I thought, we have listeners in common between the two podcasts, and the community really is flourishing, not just in anime, but in the scale modeling community in particular. Mm-hmm. And I think we're really benefiting from the breadth of discussion and the breadth of media that just fans like you and me have put out there about this amazing anime, amazing genre, etc.
Oh, I agree completely. Yeah. So where will people find the Cutting Mat podcast?
Everywhere you find podcasts. Yeah, we're
excellent.
On iTunes, Spotify. We have a website, so the cuttingmatpodcast.com is where you can, find those central links. We have Patreon subscribers, etc., and a Discord for those that are interested. So yeah, definitely check us out if you're into building Gunpla. It's not even about being an advanced builder or anything like that. If you're just, it's something you do as a pastime and you want something to listen to aside from the Mobile Suit Breakdown podcast, check us out. It's good fun.
So at what point did you first connect your love of Gundam with your studies?
It's through and through. When I really dug into looking at the human psyche and looking at personality, and in particular in my area of educational psychology, the development of children as they progress from early childhood to adolescence to adulthood. And I think that again, Gundam really lends itself to that well, because we're looking at child soldiers. We look at that from First Gundam, Zeta, and we'll see that continue as we expose to the other seasons and series as well. We have these protagonists, and some cases antagonists, or people have been placed in that position where their experience of childhood and their experience of learning and development is arrested by these experiences of war and wartime crisis. And so it always fascinated me, how we can put a kind of research lens on analyzing the experiences of these characters as we watch the show. So I've really, really enjoyed the level of detail and how thorough you guys are when going through the character. Even I know you're coming at it from kind of a liberal arts perspective per se, and looking at it as a piece of art or a work of art, so to speak. But I even appreciate when you dig into kind of like a psychoanalysis of the characters as you go. It's not something that I've dug into for my own work, but I always enjoy considering the characters from a psychological perspective, but it's taken into consideration, as you guys have, when the show was made, what was going on, and how abreast the show creators and producers might have been of how characters would interact and how characters would react to circumstances around them.
And the sort of historical understanding of the psyche as well.
Exactly. In particular, we could talk about Camille because he came across, and let me preface this by saying that I'm probably, I don't know if I'm the chief apologist for him, but I'll probably get pretty close to you, Tom, about, you know.
I was going to say that throne is occupied.
Yes. So, you know, we'll evaluate how close I get to that.
Well, I'm glad we are on the same page with regard to Camille.
Even I came around.
Yeah, I noticed.
It's fortuitous that we're doing this now. When we had originally talked to you, Bailey, it was pretty much near the beginning of Zeta, and we had talked about doing a conversation like this that would have coincided with the Hong Kong arc, when Camille was not quite so fully developed a character, and I think Nina found him much more insufferable at that point. This would have been perhaps a more confrontational discussion.
Indeed. So, Zeta Gundam, you know, like we talked about, I started with Wing, or, you know, rather, all of us were forced to start with Wing, I suppose. But unfortunately, not you, Nina.
No, somehow missed that one.
But when it piqued my interest and I sought out more of Gundam and other aspects of it, I don't remember how it exactly happened, but it wasn't First Gundam, for example, that I came across first. It was Zeta Gundam. And that I share with some friends of mine, that somehow Zeta Gundam came out first. And so my understanding of a lead character in Gundam outside of Gundam Wing and Ultra Universe, whatever, is as Camille. And at this point in my research and in my career, I felt that I can apply kind of a critical lens and, you know, apply some developmental theories, some educational theories towards Camille, and really kind of flesh out hopefully what Tomino, hopefully what the showrunners intended to present with him.
Let's talk about the parameters of that lens for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
During Zeta, Camille is, I think, 17 years old.
Yeah.
Where does that put him within the range of your studies? He's developed quite a bit at this point, but he's not yet a fully developed adult.
You're quite right. So one of the first theories that we can use is Erikson's psychosocial development theory, and it's stage theory that extends throughout the lifespan of an individual. Mm-hmm. It has 8 stages. There are, of course, criticisms of Erikson's formulation of such a theory, you know, and recognizing that he's looking at it from, let's say, Western European view. So it does have limits to how generalizable and certainly how thorough it might be across cultures, etc. And then another critique, of course, of stage theories in general is the idea that you don't necessarily move through all of them in the same order as other people, or get stuck in a phase, or are incapable of moving back and forth between stages. More modern theories that follow a sequence usually allow the ability to extend multiple characteristics of a stage in other stages, or not progress in a standard way. But that being said, where Camille would tend to fall is around the 5th stage, which is an identity versus role confusion conflict. So let me say that Erikson presents each of these stages, each of the 8 stages, in terms of a conflict that is going on within the person as they develop, as they interact with the world. Mm-hmm. So there is a component of kind of making it a little bit ecologically valid. So recognizing that this isn't a person within a bubble. This is a person that is going to interact with other individuals around them, their family, their friends, etc., and kind of form a sense of themselves in relation to that. So with identity versus role confusion, it's around 12 to 18 years. So we have Camille falling right at the kind of the tail end of that, being 17. And you can see at least up to the first 20 episodes, but certainly the first 10 episodes, really trying to seek out kind of a role for himself, or seek out a kind of sense of identity, whether in, according to Erikson's theory, in terms of occupation, in terms of a gender role, in terms of politics, when we think about the larger kind of political climate of Zeta Gundam, and in terms of ideals. What I like about Camille, though, in terms of ideals that we can say more or less right off the bat, applying another theory, so Kohlberg's theory of moral development, he seems to, early on in the show and then throughout, even to the end, is that he has a questioning about fighting. He has a questioning about the loss of life and things like that, you know, which, according to Kohlberg's theory, would fall into a post-conventional view, which is you have a recognition of laws, and I guess in this case you have a recognition of the kind of suspension of laws of death and murder in a wartime scenario, but you have a valuing for life that is, let's say, outside of that, or maybe above that. Above all else, you know, there should be a preservation of life, no matter what the circumstances. So we see that at least in various points expressed by Camille.
Yeah, definitely.
So early on in the show, Camille's sort of clear conflict with himself and people around him about how he sees himself and his life versus this role that he's found himself in. Is that the kind of conflict that we're talking about when we talk about identity versus role confusion?
Quite right. Exactly. What really comes through, and when you guys talk about it, is where Ayug is imposing on him a role that they have, you know, and let's say we don't get enough time with the parents to see much of that, but they're certainly in school, as he's running away in the very first episode, there is a place that he's supposed to be that he's not, you know? So he's stepping outside of these expectations, but at the same time, we also see instances where he is unsure about what he should be doing and where he should be, you know, which is that conflict, but it's also that defiance of any kind of external suggestion of what he should be doing, at least initially.
So early on, there is a lot of focus on Camille and the expected activities that he's rejecting. Like, I think specifically about his interview with the military police officer after he's been detained, when the guy is like, you used to be in all these clubs that you did really well at, but you're not doing them anymore. Why, you're so well qualified, you could go into the army. And Camille's reaction to that is just like, ugh, just like total disgust. But then I notice in like episode 2 or something, he says, I hate the Titans, I want to run away and fight the Titans. He expresses this desire to join Ayug, but as soon as he actually does join Ayug, then he also starts resisting the role that they're trying to put him in. Is that the same sort of thing, this rejection of the role that is being put on you, kind of regardless of what the role is, and even if it's something that you thought you wanted?
Quite right. It's interesting we're asking, and I think Nina touches on this in the last episode, is that we're asking a lot of resolve from a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
You know, we're asking for a lot of well-contemplated decisions, and basically we're asking adult behavior from Camille at this 17 years of age. So he makes a decision to join Ayug, and I'd be curious to know more about what is driving that. It might be a political, you know, view that he has, or it might just be a rebellion against his parents associated with the Titans, you know. And so he moves into Ayug, but I think what we get presented is Ayuk being a kind of rebellious group still has a structure and still has an order that they need to follow in order to be a cohesive oppositional force to the Titans. And he seems to recoil from that still in that circumstance, or he seems to be surprised by it initially and unwilling to commit to that at that point.
Well, he does seem to have a instinctive resistance to authority and to hierarchy. And while the Titans are authoritarian and very hierarchical, Ayuk is no less hierarchical, and at times also seems very authoritarian.
So I'll add what he is he's in this state of moratorium about his identity and the circumstance of being in the family with Franklin and Hilda's parents. So essentially being within the Titans and then breaking out from that. And it seems his only other choice is Ayuk. That's not allowing him the space to kind of come to a decision of his own. And so when he gets into that situation with Ayuk, and they're like, are you a new type? You fight really well. You pilot the Mark II really well. Come fight for us. Is like, well, he's not ready for that. He's not ready for somebody to impose that on him because he's still coming to a decision on his own about what's going on.
They get to the moon, and Camille is saying, well, I haven't made up my mind yet. And they say, no, this is actually not a choice you get to make. We have made the decision for you.
So, let's stack the moral stage that he might be in at this point, too, which is that he has a valuing of life. And so the only circumstance of war is that lives will be lost in the process. He's put into this position of having to fight. And we see instances, so we see multiple occasions where he rushes the Mark II, he goes out and fights. I suppose there is a transition, I guess, by the time he does get the Zeta Gundam, where it's kind of automatic, but his reasons for fighting tend to stem around protecting the people around him or doing things to, defend the immediate relationships that he's formed, as opposed to fighting the much larger issue at hand. It is combined, of course, with he hates the Titans, so he's gonna fight the Titans. But in terms of the motivation on a micro level, it's to maintain or at least keep people alive so he can develop relationships with them,
And at this point, we have also seen Katz enter the picture, who in his development seems to resemble Camille in a lot of ways.
Yes.
But there are also a lot of characters around their age who don't turn out the way they did. So do you have a theory for why Camille and Katz ended up the way they did?
It stems from their experiences, and I think I'll touch on an area that we may or may not agree on, which is the kind of the ideology of Camille's emotional state and his ability to regulate his emotions. And with that, I'll posit a theory that you can tell me if it makes sense to you. And with Katz, it's similar because we know him being, one of the three orphans from the previous series and going through those traumatic experiences at that time. But with Camille's case, let's start with him. He does demonstrate, and it seems to be an inability to control his emotions under certain circumstances. He's impulsive, and we can probably attribute this inability as more extensive than your typical 17-year-old boy should be.
We're both nodding over here, just to confirm.
Yeah, so right off the bat, first episode, he goes off on Jared, in the instance with, Camille's the girl's name, So we get this instance of a wild outburst, and we get it again, let's say, as well with the MP and seeking revenge. And we see other instances of it throughout the series as well. I think we see a bit less as we go on. So there's certainly some development that's occurring. But this initial kind of encounter with him and his emotional state might suggest that there is something behind it in terms of traumatic events that happened to lead to that. So I think when you talked about it, you compared it with Amuro, for example, and the kind of experience that he went through during the 1 Year War and the reaction that he had, which when you talked about it in the first series and again in relation to Camille, that really rang true. And also the demonstration of the symptoms that we saw with Amuro rang true. But I think you discussed it as it might be more indicative of complex PTSD, so complex post-traumatic stress disorder, with Camille in relation to his likely childhood experiences with an abusive father, maybe an inattentive mother or whatnot. And there are aspects of that might be the case, but I'm not entirely sure if it rises to the level of complex PTSD. The instances that we do see with Franklin and Hilda, it definitely suggests, as you say, he hits him. I think it was after Hilda died. They came back to the Titan's ship. Franklin's there. Camille says something about Franklin's lover, and he hits him. He slaps him, punches him, right?
Yeah, he punches him in the face. And
it was apparent that Camille is not unfamiliar with that experience. So there might be something there that indicates, certainly physical abuse. But with complex PTSD and then PTSD proper, we would see quite a range of demonstrated symptoms across the board. Things like having like a reaction, an extreme reaction to heightened things that are extremely violent or extremely disastrous, like natural disasters, war, fighting, things like that. And we see that Camille is able to kind of maintain himself throughout those situations for the most part. Indeed, he's out there fighting in a mobile suit. The one in particular that come to mind is when Wong Lee hits him. Yeah, episode 9, he beats him unconscious, right? So that is an extremely alarming event to see in the show. But when you take a good look at Camille's reaction, it would seem to me that it's not so alarming to him in a sense that it triggers, and we can ask how much are they really able to depict in an anime from the 1980s, but still, he does have a reaction. And that reaction, if you ask me, it seems more level and it seems more lucid than someone that is suffering from the effects of CPTSD or PTSD. It's a questioning of why did you hit me? Why are you doing that? I didn't do anything to you, whatever.
Fairly proportional to what happened and not as extreme as we might expect to see in somebody who's experiencing PTSD or CPTSD.
Here's one aspect within PTSD and CPTSD that he might that might be a little bit more applicable in his case. He does demonstrate emotional dysregulation, and this still stems from experiences in childhood that would disrupt the normal development of emotional regulation, the kind of ability to be aware of your emotions and more or less control them, in situations where you're in a state of heightened arousal. So it falls within the symptoms and the kind of diagnostic criteria of PTSD, but it can come from a number of other areas. It can come from anxiety disorders, depressive or mood disorders, for example, and it could get to the point of personality disorders, so borderline, bipolar. All of these, including PTSD, have within them this kind of problem of emotional dysregulation that can be as a kind of result of childhood trauma or things like physical abuse, emotional abuse in early childhood. For example, one aspect of that is in that very first episode, again, his reaction to Jared saying that Camille is a girl's name, etc., is this outburst of physicality. It's this extreme anger. And then the kind of characterization that we have of Camille from, anybody that watches Gundam is he's an angry boy.
Mm-hmm.
But to have across the board see PTSD as a result of experiences in early childhood, we don't have enough material there to really indicate that conclusively. There would also be kind of visual cues that they could use to evoke that we saw with Amuro during battle, like having these kind of hallucinations about it, having the after effects, kind of having him be riddled by that even out of the Gundam, things like that. There are ways that they could demonstrate that to us that we just didn't see with Camille. Whereas we do see these observable behaviors of these outbursts or these strained, another example is, of emotional dysregulation, the strained relationships that he has with people throughout this series.
Mm-hmm. So there's one behavior that I want to focus in on. Later on in the series, post Wong Li beating, Camille has this tendency, especially maybe exclusively with female enemy pilots, where he essentially refuses to fight them. And he just sort of lets himself be like smacked around and beaten by these, in some cases by the pilots, and in other cases he lets the Zeta be beaten up by the Psycho Gundam or the Psycho Gundam Mark II or the Bound Dock.
Yeah.
Where do you think that willingness to just let himself be abused comes from, and how does it fit into this?
There's a few things that happen there, and you guys kind of touch on it as well in terms of the male and female roles and how those are presented in this series in relation to how Japan views traditional male and female roles. And we see instances of that not just in Gundam and Zeta Gundam, but other series where we have what seems to be, you know, very progressive ideas about it on one hand, and we have these instances of a male character demonstrating kind of a chauvinist view of male-female roles. That's one aspect. Another aspect does relate back to his relationship with his mother again, and what we can glean from where that goes. And as you guys discuss, what he does with Emma and Rekoa and, you know, any number of the characters, maybe not Beltoshka, but throughout the series as kind of being a sort of surrogate mother. So that probably experience with his mother, which we can maybe say was neglectful or having an insecure attachment to his mother, really affects every other relationship he has with women throughout the series. And in the instance of fighting 4 initially, but then fighting Rosamia and female characters throughout, once he knows it's them, we can see where he gets that shift. And I think we see it most specifically with Rosamia when she initially shows up with the Geplant. He's fighting, but then he finds out that it's a female pilot, and then he changes his kind of, and as you say, he goes through these waves of, oh, he's going to defend who he needs to defend. I think it was cats that, you know, they have to rescue at that point. But then he's ambivalent about how he's going to interact with them. So it's really curious, but I would say it does connect back to the relationship that he had with his mother, whether, like I said, it might have been neglectful, it might have been an insecure attachment in early childhood if she was preoccupied with her work. But that really carries forward as what we see. Again, the thing that I kind of couch this in is how much do the creators, how much does Tomino and the creators of the show really inject into it, into the show for us to notice and pick up things like that. But certainly, you know, there are things there that they're trying to tell us about Camille and Camille in relation to the female characters in the show.
I want to go back to your comment about strained relationships, because one of the things that struck me as probably one of the biggest differences between First Gundam and Zeta, First Gundam is all about this found family and the relationships and responsibilities between these characters. Camille has so few close relationships of any kind with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is just circumstances? Fewer of the people around him are peers, are his own age and his own rank. And so, like, ability to be friends rather than to be, a mentor as he tries to be to Cats, or someone's junior as he is to most of the rest of the crew.
Mm-hmm.
How much of it is Camille's sort of inability to form and maintain relationships?
Yeah, when looking at these things, it's not really one or the other. And as it stands with like conducting an analysis of or evaluating the circumstances, it tends to be a both and. So that was always very intriguing how Zeta Gundam, it's the second series to come out, and yet they give us this character 2 years older than Amuro was when he first went into the Gundam. But whereas Amuro had, he had Fra, he had Kai, he had Hayato, he had all the people within his age range or cohort to interact with. And then they showed us the dynamic of how close he was with them, or maybe even not so close, even though they're could have been were in his same class or whatever. We get Camille, and as I talked about before, he demonstrates where he at times doesn't want to interact with people. At other times, he reaches out and wants to make connections.
Almost desperately so.
Exactly, and yet they put him in the ship with mostly adults. It's like, it's intriguing. So in that instance, we have that chasm that he needs to traverse if he's going to have a relationship with anybody. It's like maturity and, just life experience that, whether it's Quattro or Rekoa initially, any of the crew of the Agama, which are all, mostly adults, mostly 1 year war veterans. And the closest one, as you guys discussed, is Emma, who's still, an adult in relation to him and has a more kind of older sister relationship at most with him, even if he wanted to try to have it as a different way initially. So he gets placed into that situation in contrast with Amuro. And then, as I said, if we can take emotional dysregulation as a possible diagnosis for Camille, then we can observe that he is going to have difficulty forming and maintaining relationships with individuals. So it's really these two things combining to really put him in that spot. And it's interesting that that's what they give to us right off the bat.
You talked about Camille's relationships with women on the crew being a reflection of his relationship with his mother. Do you think the same applies for his relationship with the other men like Quattro and Amuro versus his relationship with his father?
It seems that way. And he says it quite explicitly at various points with his parents and the way adults are supposed to be, or that they, made the choices that they made. We get it again when Amuro is kind of reintroduced as a character, in the way that he idolized Amuro for a bit, and then people started comparing him to Amuro, and then he didn't like that. Then he meets Amuro, and his view, I guess, don't meet your heroes, but the view is he goes into kind of a critique of Amuro and the way Amuro is in relation to what it's doing. So Amuro, as we see, is kind of struggling with his own sense of identity, or his own sense of, we could even probably put him right on Erickson's psychosocial stages theory, is that he's struggling with generativity, struggling with being useful, identifying with how useful he was during the 1 year war. And yet Camille, he doesn't allow him that space. He immediately is critical of him, as he has been with Quattro and continues to be throughout the show, about what he does. And the way I see it is, he wants to be able to look up to them and see them as the way it means to be a man, I guess, or to be an adult. because he wasn't able to observe that with his own father. And yet they seem to not really hold up to his ideal view of what it means, for the most part. I think at a certain point, he just resolves to kind of make his own decisions about what he thinks is right and what he feels he should do. And it's irrespective of his perceptions of Amuro or Quattro or any of the other adult males that he's encountered throughout his experience in Ayug. With Camille, we have, like I said, I don't think he's had that much arresting of his development through some, like I said, through childhood experiences, because he's strong-headed and he demonstrates his opinion and his resolve quite often through the show. He does have conflicts within him, but he's not a blank slate for somebody like Quattro to impress upon, or Amuro. He has a kind of perspective that he then challenges them with.
And this really distinguishes him from the other mentee type characters in the show, especially toward the end there we see Haman has Minerva, Sirocco has Sarah, and then Quattro kind of has Camille, but Camille is really the only one who is a person unto himself and is able to assert his personhood even against these parent-like ideals.
Yeah, and so when you bring those up, so we have Minerva, which she's 8, right? I don't remember, but she's a young girl. And we have Sarah as well, an adolescent girl. And then we have Camille. So can we again observe that, are they making any statements on male-female roles or kind of male-female personalities in these circumstances? Because again, it's there where we have those dyads, if we say, of the mentor-mentee, and yet Camille being the one male under those circumstances. I mean, we have Katz as well, sort of, but even when we add Katz into the situation, he has a view of what is right and what is wrong, and that stands in opposition to the adults around him more often than not. Even if Amuro is the one person that he wanted to look up to, and he does defend him on occasions, but he also challenges him, at least in the very initial kind of when Fra and Katz and they visit him. He's like, why aren't you the one to be doing this stuff, to be the hero under this circumstance? It's curious.
I think the show is definitely commenting on gender. They do in a lot of ways, sort of explicit and more subtle, probably in terms of the ways in which women are more likely to be defined by their relationships. Sarah in particular places so much importance on her trusted relationship with Sirocco, and then feels very threatened when he develops a relationship with Rekoa. And also just a general sense of a state of dependence that Minerva really depends on Haman. There's no way for Minerva to be independent in that scenario.
Yeah.
And similar for Sarah, both because of perhaps an institutional upbringing, because she's a cyber new type, because she maybe doesn't have a family or anywhere to go, a sense that she's entirely dependent on this relationship for her survival and her mental and physical well-being.
In that same situation with Sirocco, the one that stands out to me, that it boggles the mind. I haven't gotten to the episodes you guys talked about it yet. So, but in any case, Rekoa, can you? that one really, it confuses me to this day. I know the show sets up this kind of reversal of roles. So Emma moves over to Ayug from Titans, and then we have Rekoa doing the opposite. But what's going on there?
Yeah, we do talk about it at length. We basically sum it up as Rekoa being someone who has sort of let life experience push her into certain situations. She's not very self-directed.
Yes, I could see that.
And is sort of unwilling to make an ideological stand in any way. she feels like a relationship will fix her life. Like, she expresses, I think, to Quattro that she feels very emotionally numb and disconnected. She thinks a romantic relationship will fix that, and nobody in Ayug pursues a romantic relationship with her who is an acceptable partner.
Interesting.
Whereas Sirocco,
as a charismatic leader,
right, who's willing to exert that charisma on her in a way that nobody has done before. And that allows her to be again in a position of not having to make her own decisions.
And not having to take responsibility for her own decisions.
She very much puts responsibility for her choice to leave on, oh, well, the men of Ayug. Nobody in Ayug valued me, and so I left.
Yeah, okay. I can see that.
She also, at one point, describes her experiences during the 1 Year War. She has a little flashback, and I think it might actually literally be a flashback. I think Rekoa probably has some PTSD as well. She was a guerrilla fighting on the moon, and everyone in her unit was killed. She was the sole survivor from that, which may have left her not really feeling any particular attachments to whatever group she's in. So she doesn't have strong loyalty to Ayug. They were just the group that she happened to fall into. And then when Sirocco comes by and gives her a better offer, why not?
I could see that. As you say, it's not so much that she was driven by the Ayug cause, but rather it's almost like she got swept up in it, and then likewise got swept up in the kind of the aura that Sirocco had, and just going with that.
In those episodes, immediately before she is captured by Yazan and then defects to the Titans, she's clearly not well. She's clearly like going through some kind of break.
That's right.
She keeps like her mind wanders and she just sort of lets herself drift off into space. A couple of times it looks like she's trying to go and get herself killed in battle. Like something is seriously wrong with her, and Sirocco took advantage of that.
That is an instance where they are depicting, instances of mental health being challenged and how that drives the narrative forward with a character like Sirocco. That's good.
She also, as sort of like a final point, and coming back to the gender roles aspect, seems to find some comfort in the idea of like a very traditional submissive woman's role. That she finds a lot of satisfaction in that for herself, and it's not something that we see much of within Ayug. We have women pilots, we have one woman engineer who we see around. And she even, towards the very end of Zeta, you can tell she feels betrayed when Sirocco mentions to her that he wants to prop her up as the leader for their new movement. Her response when he tells her this is, she's like, I gave up everything for you.
That's awkward. That's awkward. It's not what she wants. I mean, he's not going to attend to that anyway.
Yeah,
but
Sirocco has never cared what anybody wanted.
But it indicates where her mind is as far as what she should be doing.
Right.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like I said, Zeta is awesome.
Well, I think that's a great way to end it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on Mobile Suit Breakdown.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I confess now, at some point in the future, I want to talk to you about Char.
Oh, yes. That's a whole...
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That was the first thing I thought of when you mentioned Erickson's theories and that people can get, like, stuck in a stage. I was like, oh, like Char.
There's a lot to him.
Sometime in the future.
Yeah, I'd be delighted.
Next time on episode 3.9, Putting the Pieces Together, we cover Mobile Suit Gundam Double Zeta, episode 11, and what a boob. Women are complicated.
No, you're complicated.
A hopeless, awful man. The Odd Couple. A parody of a cyber new type. Transformation sequence. Breaking the fourth wall. Togetherness.
Togetherness.
Togetherness. And, hey, that's the name of the show. You will see the battlefield of new types.
Mobile Suit Breakdown is written, recorded, and produced by us, Tom and Nina, in scenic New York City, within the ancestral and unceded land of the Lenape people, and made possible by listeners like you. The opening track is Wasp by Misha Dioxin. The closing music is Long Way Home by Spinning Ratio. The recap music this season is New York City, Instrumental by Spinning Merkaba. You can find links to the sources for our research, the music used in the episode, additional information about the Lenape people, and more in the show notes and on our website, GundamPodcast.com. You can also get in touch with us on Twitter or Instagram at Gundam Podcast, on Facebook.com/Gundam Podcast, or by email at GundamPodcast@gmail.com. Or share your wrong Gundam opinion with the world by shouting, "Hey, isn't it weird that mobile suits are hard and crunchy on the outside with a soft, chewy center?" out your window at passersby. We might not hear you, but the world needs to know. This week's wrong Gundam opinion comes from Jace347 in the MSB Discord. Thank you, Jace347. And thank you for listening. We lost the call again.
Okay.
I'm gonna call him back though.
Yeah. Hi again.
Okay. Yeah.
I swear we didn't hang up on you as soon as the interview was over.
We're running pretty long. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on that we haven't brought up yet?
No.
And then Wave Rider crash.
Pierce the heavens. Oh, it's good login. Sorry.
Also great.
Sirocco would refer to himself as the heavens. He would do that.
Yeah.
There's the sirens.
You guys were not kidding.
No, it's fine. I think it's funny. That might go in our outtakes. Baby squeak.